First of all, just apologise, we're having a bit of an issue with the sound, so for some of the videos we might just have to explain over the video because we can't get our sound connected. We also asked for I'm making all the excuses now. We also asked for tables to do an activity as well, but they weren't able to bring the tables in, so we might just try and do that in another way. So if you could just bear with us, that'd be great. Thank you. So my name's Mo Hart. I'm the Learning Enhancement Coordinator at Horizon School, which is basically the Senko. And so I organise the supporting children who have difficulties in all areas, right across the range from FS1 right up to Year 6. Today, obviously, we're going to be looking at mathematics because of the subjects of the conference today. But that's me, basically. I'm going to give you a bit of an outline of the presentation in a minute, but I'll just let my colleague introduce himself.
Hi everybody, I'm Sean Igglesby from the Higher Colleges of Technology. I'm the programme leader for the Early Childhood programme there, education programme, and we're very lucky to be supported by Marion at Horizon School with our students in there. And they're learning a lot about special needs and mathematics and all sorts of wonderful things there at Horizon, which my colleague was going to tell you about.
Okay, so first of all, I'm just going to give you an outline of the presentation and then we'll go into it. The first thing we're going to look at is just a very quick overview of the support of SEN at Horizon, just to explain very quickly how we do it. Then we're going to look at developmental continuums. That's basically a measure so that we can see where children, especially SEN children, but all children, are on a developmental continuum and how we can use a developmental continuum. We'll show you a bit more about that in a minute. Then we're going to look at common characteristics of children with learning difficulties in mathematics. Then we're going to look at accommodations and modifications for children who have difficulties with mathematics. I have actually got a handout, sorry. See you all taking the pictures, I can give you handouts. Could you do that if you could pass them out? It's a copy of the presentation, so you can have a look, make notes on that. Okay. Yeah. And common areas of mathematical difficulty was just there as well, we're going to look at. Okay, just very quickly I'd like to say at Horizon we organise our support for children who have any special educational needs in 3 waves. We have wave 1, which is support generally in the classroom, differentiation by the class teacher, separate targets by the class teacher, modifications and accommodations by the class teacher, and support by TAs at class level. So if a child is identified with an issue, the class teacher is the one who will identify that and will be the first one to try and support any needs they have, and in this case in mathematics. Wave 2, once they have had that support, they go on to a register on wave 1. If after a term, for example, of support at wave 1 level, they are not making the progress that we would like to see, then we look at them again and we think, well, maybe they need a little bit more. Maybe there are gaps that we need to fill here. We need to take them out to do that. So then we put them onto a wave 2 level, which is generally within the school, but they're taken out in groups with an LE teacher, who then, with discussion with the class teacher, will go in and support any gaps in knowledge they have. And then we have finally wave 3. Again, if children have been on wave 1 support, they've been on wave 2 support, they've had that intervention for a while, they're still not making progress in the areas that we want to see them make progress in, then we look at a wave 3 intervention, which is where we normally would screen them to see if there's a specific difficulty, rather than just gaps. And then we may bring in and talk to parents, and we may bring in specialists, and that might actually also involve in the end one-to-one intervention if they're identified with a very severe need or a specific difficulty, such as dyscalculia or even dyslexia and the effects it can have on numeracy. But I'm not going to be able to, I'm fully aware of the specific difficulties with numeracy, like dyscalculia and other issues like that. I'm not going to have time to go into all of that today. What I'm really going to be looking at today is more how we can support children who are obviously falling behind, who have some gaps, and we're going to think about the sort of accommodations and modifications we can do to help those children. Okay, so we wanted to look first of all really look at developmental continuum. We identify children with difficulty in mathematics. Usually this comes from the class teacher who would have identified the fact that the children are falling behind or they are having difficulties with certain areas of maths that other children in the class may not be having difficulty with. Now, one thing that I think I'm sure all of you are aware of developmental continuums, in your schools, your policies, for example, your numeracy policy, your calculation policy, will be based around a developmental continuum, which tells us approximately where children should be at certain stages. So between 5 and 7, what they should be able to do, between 8 and 9, what they should be able to do. Now, we feel that that is your real starting point. Obviously, if you're in a class of 5-year-olds or 6-year-olds and a child is not achieving what would be on the developmental continuum for that, then you need to start looking back. There's no point in just pounding on with those particular things that you're doing for 5 and 7-year-olds. You really need to start thinking about, have they got gaps before this? Is there something that means they can't do any of this because they have gaps in their knowledge? And then using the developmental continuum, you can then just move back. So you can move back and see what should they be able to do at 4 years in this particular area. If they can't do some of those things, what should they be able to do at 3 years? So, one of the ways I'm trying to sort of say is the best way to measure to see where children are is not just saying, oh, they should be doing this year group level, why aren't they? And keep doing it, is to look back and use a developmental continuum. We've put a few examples of developmental continuums up there for your interest as well, and they're on there, so if you want to have a look.
This one is from the early years foundation stage and covers all of the areas of learning here. But if we look specifically at maths, for example, from what Mo was just talking to you about, you can see, for example, and this is not rocket science, by the way, it's just from one step to the next. So, for example, if we look here and we say that, I'm going to do this very simply, just to give you an idea of what we should do, because very often we find teachers in the classroom are stuck, they don't know what to do with the child and their learning. Simple step, go back to your maths policy or go back to the developmental continuum and see what, well, can they, for example, if they can't count reliably up to 6 objects, then we say, okay, let's just take a step back, and they count up to 3 objects, okay? If they can't do that, let's take other steps backwards. And this is an example from the UK Early Years Foundation Stage curriculum here, which has all of the areas of learning. This is a developmental continuum, if you like, and we have another one here. And as Mo was saying, this is like your maths policies, if you like. It's too small for you to see, but I think you get the idea. It's a linear, it's often not a linear progression, but if you are stuck at a particular stage of development with a child in the area of mathematics or anything, to be honest, what you need to do is refer back to these developmental continuums and say, well, if they can't do this, can they do this? If they can't do that, well, I need to take a couple of steps backwards. And we all appreciate that in a busy classroom with children with many different abilities, it's very difficult sometimes to differentiate your teaching to meet the needs of every single child, which is why at Horizon they have the wave 1, 2, 3 interventions, which are one way of coping with that. Okay, we'll move back to the slide.
So basically, what we're saying really is, and also for assessments that you do and your day-to-day in the classroom, you'll be aware of things that your children are not being able to do, and I'm talking about those children who are having difficulties. And so, if you can look at a good continuum, if you look at your policy, which should be based on a continuum like that, just take the steps back.
I remember actually, I don't think I told Mo the story. First school I was ever in, I was a KG2 teacher, and there was a guy teaching in year 5, he had a child in his class that couldn't read, he didn't do anything with it. And he said, I don't know what to do. And simply, all he needed to do was to try and find out where that child was and then work back. But in those days, we didn't have the level of support that we have now. It wasn't actually officially in place, and thank goodness we do have it now, I suppose.
Okay, so basically, as I say, you're free to have a look at those developmental continuums and have a look and see what we're talking about there. Now we're going to look at some of the common characteristics of children with learning difficulties, and this, I put in mathematics here, but obviously you're going to recognise here that these are children that have difficulties in lots of different areas, but it will affect their mathematics just the same as it affects other things. A little bit later we'll look at specific difficulties of mathematics itself. First of all, attention deficits. Obviously the child who is finding it very difficult to focus and pay attention during a task, especially in numeracy, will lose steps. So they might be working through a problem, they lose attention, they forget what the next thing they have to do. It's a common problem. Also, with the attention, just literally taking the information in at the beginning of a session, they won't have taken all that information in if they haven't been attending. So that's one particular characteristic that will affect their numeracy. Processing deficits. Again, children who may be listening at an introduction who have processing difficulties and take a little bit longer to process information. If it's given out to them once at the beginning, they will have lost some of that because they'll still be processing the first part and they might lose the second part. And so that is a problem in terms of them taking in that information. So they'll we need the accommodations we'll look at later. Memory deficits. Children who, and a lot of children with specific difficulties have short-term memory difficulties, so they will take in the information during an introduction session, but then they will very soon forget it. You know, they've got quite a limited capacity for short-term memory on their memory shelf, and it falls off, and they don't have that information anymore. It hasn't moved to their long-term memory. So that will be an issue, especially with numeracy, because there's so much memory involved in remembering numbers and number patterns and number facts. Organisational difficulties impact strongly on numeracy, because numeracy is a lot about organisation. When you're solving problems, and patterns as well, it's all to do with organisation. When you're solving problems, you're doing it in steps. You know, and if you're not organisationally able to sort of do it in chronological steps, it's going to be an issue for the child with organisational difficulties. Motor skills difficulties. These are things like when children are finding it difficult anyway just to put their numbers in small squares on a box, or they're finding it difficult to measure because they haven't got the fine motor skills to measure. They might be reversing numbers back and forward, which also is similar to spatial difficulties as well. So all of those sort of things will impact everything.
Especially in the early years where a lot of the mathematical activity is concrete. So you're manipulating small objects to group them and to count them.
And then so sort of counting each eternal each little dinosaur can be an issue for children with motor skill issues. And language disorders. Children have language disorders. You might think, well, okay, it's not numeracy, but obviously it impacts because of numeracy language, which may be more unfamiliar anyway, and children may be having difficulties with more familiar language, but will definitely have difficulty with unfamiliar language of maths language. Also, children with language disorders will have big problems with word problems, obviously, because they'll be having to read those, and it's not so much they can't read, but they can't necessarily understand the structure of the language or understand that. And that takes us on to the reading difficulties. Obviously children who have dyslexia, they might not have specific difficulties with picking up numeracy concepts, but when it comes to reading mathematical problems, they just can't read them. They just can't read them, so because of their other difficulty, and that will impact. And visual perceptual skills, which I mentioned a little bit aside with the motor skills there. Obviously that's quite a big one with numeracy. If children are looking at shape or three-dimensional shapes, or they're looking at problems on a page and trying to, it's a bit the same as organisation as well, but trying to organise it on a page visually and spatially, they can find that very confusing. Also, if they have lots of numbers on a page or lots of problems, visually they can find that confusing.
And also, it's not really as simple as that, because very often you'll get a child that has a combination of all of these, or an attention deficit might lead to a processing deficit, a memory deficit. Certainly, attention deficits will lead to organisational difficulties. So it's not as straightforward as identifying the one issue and dealing with that. Very much they're all tied together. It's like a big web that links their ability to learn effectively.
Now, I've put up on the board there a copy of this one, because we're going to refer back to it, because the next thing we're going to look at, these are some of the characteristics you'll see. The next we're going to look at is accommodations for, because this is incredibly important for children with special educational needs, the accommodations. You can't really be treating them the same as everybody else in that class, because they're not on the same ballpark, they're not on the same playing field. They need to be brought to that same playing field. And so they need to be, and that's where accommodations come in, because accommodations basically, your special educational needs children can be doing the same tasks as other children in the class, but they will be needing certain accommodations so that they can achieve it the same as other children in the class.
So we're looking at the
So we're going to have a look at some of those now. Yeah. First, we have, and I'm going to link them to some of these, reading questions for students. You know, whenever we have identified a child with a specific difficulty in numeracy, we make the accommodation in any assessments and in class that questions can be read for them. So if their specific difficulty is dyslexia, they shouldn't be impeded by the fact that they can't read the question. And so reading questions for students who have difficulties with reading obviously makes sense. We're not testing their reading in numeracy, we're testing their numeracy knowledge. So questions can be read. Presenting separate problems on a worksheet. For those children who have visual spatial difficulties, those children will need it spaced out. They will find a lot of text, a lot of numbers confusing. So if it's put on a larger print, and it's you know, it's laid out and it's more spaced apart, it's much easier for them to actually access the problem. Highlighting key points in operations, that helps children who have organisational difficulties, because they can extract the information. So if they're looking at a word problem, they can highlight parts of the problem they need rather than just get confused by the whole thing. They can then also highlight the operations just with highlighters or underlining.
Again,
That can be the same with multi-step problems.
Yeah, so like you said, it's again attention deficit, processing deficit, memory deficit, organisational deficits. All of those things can be supported with highlighting key points or operations.
More time to complete tasks. Obviously, children who have problems with processing or organisational difficulties or short-term memory will need longer. You know, I still actually find it quite excruciating that in many assessments, children, even who have special educational needs, are supposed to do mental maths activities in the same time. You know, that's a fixed time, because actually they are processing more slowly, so they should have more time. In most areas, they are given more time, but I do feel, you know, things like mental maths, it's just unfair for a child with a processing difficulty or a memory difficulty to have to be doing it at the same time as other people. So definitely some more time to complete tasks. For your children with attention deficit disorders who also can't stay still for very long, can't attend for very long, movement breaks. So give them short chunks of time to do what they need to do. So they'll do maybe one problem, they get a break, they do another one, they get a break. So that they're constantly able to come back, they get that, you know, movement out and they come back. Also, of course, allowing them to move. It doesn't matter if they're moving around when they're solving a problem, as long as they're focused on the task. Talking slowly, which I'm not doing at the moment to try and get through this, but talking slow, so I hope you're all really good at processing quickly. Talking slowly, obviously, with children who are processing memory or attention deficits. You know, you say it slowly, you say it, repeat it, so they've had twice to hear it, and that's good for all children anyway. You know, it's not going to do anybody any harm, and a lot of these things will be good for all children. Then what I often find is a very useful thing is to ask, especially students you know have a bit of an issue, repeat it back to you. And then by that time they'll have heard it twice, they'll have said it again, and often when they've said it as well, they have that internalisation of it. So that's obviously a very good accommodation. Deconstructing tasks, breaking tasks down into chunks. So, you know, when you have a word problem or a multi-step problem, getting them, you know, to break that up into little chunks and do one step at a time, which obviously helps with the organisational issues that children can have. And obviously, or practical apparatus, visual aids, kinesthetic activities, all the multi-sensory activities. And again, good for all children. You know, children, some children learn better because they're a visual learner, some learn better because they're an auditory learner, and some better because they're hands-on. You know, and a lot of children like all of those. But when you have a child with special educational needs and might have a weakness in one of those areas, if you're covering all of the areas, you're going to get them somehow. You know, if they're stronger visually but weaker auditorially, then you've got the visual there, then it's helping support their weakness elsewhere. But all of those things should be used. Practical apparatus, doing, jumping times tables, all of that. And minimise distraction. Breaking down tasks into manageable chunks, pretty similar to this one really. You know, with word problems and multi-step problems, just breaking it down, doing it a step at a time. Minimise distractions for your child with attention issues. You know, having them sit on a table with a load of rowdy boys who are their mates and lots of noise and a window just over there and a door that keeps opening next to them is not going to be the best learning environment for that child. So, you know, think carefully about children like that, have them on a table with some maybe quieter children, away from a door, not with a window in front of them, and just try and create a situation where they have a chance to focus more, they're not distracted too much. Okay, that's accommodations. Now, modifications are obviously when you have to make when you have a child who is finding it very difficult to achieve what other children in the class are trying to achieve, and accommodations are not enough for them. They actually need to have a slightly different learning outcome. And that's what modification is basically. You change it. You might reduce the task, or you might alter the learning expectation. So whereas for some children you might be expecting them to be able to do the 6 and 7 times table, for another child you might be expecting them to do 3 and 5. You know, that bit, if at a time when you were doing times multiplication, your expectation would be different. Simplify the task. So if you've got some children doing a 3-step problem, you know this child is not going to be able to access that with accommodations, give them a 2-step problem, or have them back working on a 1-step problem. This can be accommodated for in one class, it's differentiation. And reducing the task, again, similar thing really, just making it less. Okay, so they have less to do, maybe they have 2 problems to do instead of 3 or 4. And that's modifications.
Okay.
Okay, now,
So we have some common areas of mathematical difficulty. Of course, children have mathematical difficulties right across the spectrum. But according to the research and our own experience in the classroom, we've found that there are maybe 4 different areas of difficulty that are pretty common amongst young learners and primary school learners in general. The first one is memory for alphabetical facts. We did have a little video to show you there, but unfortunately the technology let us down. We put it on a flash drive and realised we had already copied a little bit of it that wouldn't actually play. So I'll let Mo explain to you what that was going to be.
Well, yeah, we're difficult. You're going to have to visualise this now. You're going to have to be really good auditory learners. We basically had we were looking at number bonds. There was a child who was looking at number bonds to 10 and was having difficulty with number bonds to 10. That was it essentially, really. You know, she was being given the number 3 and asked what number would then make 10, and wasn't able to produce the 7. Hadn't got that in her head, those bonds. Even though it had been done, you know, and for the peer group she was in, and the year before that had been done, she had not remembered those facts, she had not grasped those facts. So that was the first video. It was basically, because we were just going to show some children having difficulties first and seeing kind of what area of difficulty may be.
And this is actually a sharing session. So what we'd like to do really is just to find out from you a few of the things that you might do. What kind of accommodations might you use in order to try and help a child who has a specific difficulty with remembering mathematical facts? We talked about a few earlier on, but maybe you have some specific to your school. We saw earlier on, I think it was by Modern School, was it? That were talking about some of the Montessori equipment they use to help their children with number facts. We also, part of the video, we were going to show some children using Numicon.
Yes.
Do
you know Numicon? I don't know. It's another practical activity.
It's a great idea. They had there was a post box, and children had six. What do you call those things now?
Which one? Sorry.
The 6 block or something.
For the Numicon?
Yeah.
I'll get those and show you. You just keep talking.
So they had a 6 block, and they posted it into a letterbox, and the child who was on the other side of the letterbox had to bring the corresponding number that would add up to 10. Are you aware of that one? No. Okay. And do any of you have any other ideas how you would accommodate for a child who has issues with number bonds to 10? You've tried all the normal things that we do. Do any of you have anything that you think is quite unique or special to your school that you could share with us? I'm sure you do.
While you're thinking about that, I'll just quickly show you the Numicon if you haven't seen these before. This can be done with quiz and air rods, it can be done with the 110s block, the tens and units blocks, and these are the Numicon blocks, which are quite nice. So if you've got your 10 here, and if the children are trying to make, that's a 10 block basically. So if they're looking at number bonds, you've got here a 7 and you've got a 3, which is the one I just mentioned, and they can see that that matches up with 10. And it's quite a nice little tactile one. I'm not selling Numicon, but it's another good, I wouldn't say do it alone either, use everything, but you know, it's another good little practical activity to use.
Well, it fits nicely. It's very much like the Cuisinart ideas or the colour factors that you used to use, or maybe still do. Essentially, it's piecing it together to make the 10.
Because what we were going to do at this point, basically, was you were going to be in groups at tables, and we were going to ask you to think about an accommodation for the video we showed.
But of course, as Mo was saying earlier, we need to accommodate for all types of learning styles, and with young learners and with primary learners, and we saw that in the previous presentation, where children are singing songs, doing rhymes that associate with, for example, in this particular instance, number bonds to 10, which all helps.
So basically, if you were in here for the earlier presentations, there were 2 presentations for early years, which were showing some materials you could use. The fact is, you know, if you've got a child in year 3 who's not got their number bonds, you go back and you use those. You know, you can do what they're doing in early years. I think we'll have to do questions at the end. Is that okay? I don't know.
Although, of course, there is the maturational aspect of it.
Maybe number bonds to 10. Sorry, go on.
I think abacus is a very good idea.
Yeah.
Number bonds to 10.
Yeah, that is another very good one. Yeah. Anybody else got anything they use for bonds to 10? Yeah.
We have a base 10 and base 20 frame.
Okay.
Just like the one you were showing.
Yeah. What should, like the ones that were shown before? Like these ones. Sorry. Yeah.
So basically, base 10 frame.
Yeah.
When you had child has an option of using only 2 colors, blue or red.
Yeah.
So if it is 4 red, it's going to be 6 blue.
Yeah.
It's going to be 3 red, dragging the number into the grid.
So the ICT, There is actually with Numicon, they do also have a hardware program where they do similar things. You can drag them in. But I mean, I think the main thing to say out of all of this is that go back, you know, if you're having trouble with a child in year 3 or 4 with certain concepts and they're not getting some of these facts, go and talk to your colleagues further down the school and talk about what they're doing, because that's essentially what you need to do. It's not, you don't need to think of all these new things yourself. You need to go back and talk, you know, look on the continuum, look at what they should be doing before, and go back and talk to your colleagues and say, what would you do? You know, what were some of the things that you were showing.
Although we do appreciate that as you go further up the school, you're not going to be wanting maybe with year 10 or year 7 children to do the nursery rhymes and the kind of things that we do with very young learners.
Okay, so now this one we can show you a video. This one is a word problem solving video. What I'd just like to show you is a little girl with a word problem that she was just having. I've just given it her to have a look at and see what she would do with it, and just see the difficulty she's having with it. And we'll have a little chat. But it's only a short video.
And as we, if we come back again to the characteristics of children with learning difficulties in maths, you'll see a lot of this actually in this particular.
While you're watching, could you also just have a little think about how do you think you would accommodate bearing in mind some of those things, this child who was having that difficulty?
Again, we apologise, the sound doesn't seem to be working here, but no, it's coming out of the laptop. Do you recognise children with difficulties like this?
And she can't hear it very well. I'll explain what she says in a minute. What's the problem? Right, what she was saying was, she's looking at it, she can see she's got a bit of it, but what she's saying is, when I said what's the problem, because she was sitting there and obviously, you know, thinking, is what she was saying to me, you can't take away, that's adding, so you can't take away. So she hadn't seen that there were 2 different operations that she could do there, that she needed to chunk it and then do one thing, sort that one out, and then do the next thing. So I'll just show you very quick, well, anybody got any ideas for accommodations that they would use for that
how would you
child?
deal with a child who has an issue like this? We actually mentioned some in the accommodations earlier on, so if you want to have a quick look at the handout we gave you, see some.
Break up the task.
Break up the task. What else did you say?
Use manipulation.
Yeah.
Highlight the words.
Highlight, very good. Yeah.
Highlight information, use manipulatives, so actually physically get those numbers there. Yeah. Somebody else had one, sorry.
Yeah, also just highlight the words and break it up.
Yeah. And also, of course,
One of the handouts that we've given you gives you another idea as well. But
yes, we have given some handouts out, handouts with some more information about different accommodations and, well, particular strategies actually for helping with some of these things. You could also, of course, you'd need to highlight the operation as well, probably, so they understood what to do. Another way, which I'll just show you, and it's in one of your handouts, a similar thing to this anyway, because you want to look at the visual side of things, is looking
the
at...
gentleman over here just
Oh, did you? Sorry.
didn't see. Just said a visual.
You said a visual, right, okay. Well, shall we show that next video, because that's the one we're going to look at. So what basically I asked her to do was to sort of think about how she could maybe do it pictorially or how she could do it visually. And what she wanted to do, and this was her, she's done all of that, is draw the bus with 27 children on, then draw the bus with a little arrow showing 34 children getting on, and then she still was doing the operation down here because she actually doesn't have so much of a problem with that. And then she had the children getting off the bus and then did that operation. So by going through as almost doing it as little pictures, she was able to sort of understand herself what exactly was going on. That first she had a bus, then they had to get on, then she had that total of children on the bus, then they had to get off. So that's a really good one to do. We can do that with many different things. And also, if that doesn't help, the manipulatives, go back and do those manipulatives and get them to record that.
And of course, even with smaller children, you might be using actual concrete. Here's 10 people in here, you know, those kind of things. I mean, many of us are visual learners anyway. I don't know if when faced with a problem like this, many of you actually try and think about what it looks like. You know, there's a bus, you picture a bus in your head, you picture the people on the bus. Well, sometimes those kind of strategies are really useful for visualising the problem and trying to work out exactly what's happening.
And if you look at the handout, there's more strategies for those kind of things, you know, breaking down problems and picture strategies to help them. Then there's the next one after this. Well, that's just showing that again. It's also, she's highlighted some of it.
Okay, so I'll just go back to the beginning here. We did mention highlighting as an example. And you can see that she's highlighted the number of children that are on the bus, the number of children that got off. She put a plus there. I noticed that she didn't put a minus for the 30 going off the bus, so I even highlight that. Maybe she already...
She'd actually moved on to start doing the pictures in such as that.
So, you know, these visualizations, if you like, pictorial representations are really, really useful to get the child to see and visualize the process that's necessary to complete the problem.
So that's word problems, which is, you know, another few strategies in there as well to help you with help children with word problems.
And of course, as Mo said earlier on, if they have really difficulties as well with that, you'd probably be the one that's really need to.
Okay, representation of place value. This is quite a biggie as well. As I say, we've looked at research on this and read lots of information, and from our personal experience, and find these are some of the main kind of real stopping points for some children, especially special education need children, who need a lot more of it, really. Representation of place value, because before that it's going to be very difficult for them to getting into calculations when they're not understanding what those numbers mean. So just have a quick look here of a child having a little bit of an issue. If you can just see what the issue she's having is, and then think of an accommodation.
I'll just come back to here, and then you can see here.
Oh yeah, what I've done here is basically I was just doing a little quick warm-up at the beginning, where I was giving a number and I was underlining one of the numbers and asking them to give me the value of that number. Yeah, basically. So I'd given her 62, I asked her to give me the value of 2, and she was writing that down.
What do you think she's going to write?
I think you just saw it, didn't you?
Did she?
Yeah. She actually was okay on the, you know, when I did the 10s, she was okay on the 10s, but she was not sure about what that 2 meant in that position.
Sometimes they write some fantastic things, don't they? Really? 2 with a million, 6 zeros at the end.
So it's only a very quick video, but it just shows you she's not understood what that 2 means there. So, you know, we can't move forward on that until we've gone back and sorted that out with them.
So we're looking for what kind of accommodations could you use for a child who clearly hasn't got the idea of place value there. Any ideas? We saw some actually. I don't know how many, as I said, were in that previous section, but they had some nice Montessori materials that would do that.
Using the board where the child has to do it in a playway activity, she has to put the numbers accordingly and then fill it. That
What would
which
the
is
board?
the column.
Okay, so you'd have a board with
Columns,
columns?
yeah, 3
And you-
columns, board, 2 columns,
Okay.
where he is playing and learning.
Sorry?
I think she can use money also. If she, yes,
Okay.
she can use money. She can bring, for example, if you have 62 dirhams, she can bring 6 tens, this green paper, and she can bring 2 dirhams, 2 coins. So she will understand that 2 is a coin, so it is units, simple thing. That's right.
That would work with that number. It might be difficult with some other.
That's not a bad idea, then, but we are in the UAE, so we could do that. So yeah, yeah, the 10 base blocks, actually in a similar way, in conjunction with the columns. You could do that, couldn't you?
Sorry, yes.
Changing each one to a house, as if the unit has the house without a garden. The tent has the garden with 0. The garden represents how many zeros, and you make it like visual. The house, the smallest house for the ones. So the place value, even the place value, they differentiate between the value and the place value. It stands. So it's a place where it lives.
Yeah.
As if it's a place to represent the house.
Is that something you use? That's very interesting. I haven't heard that one before, but I can see. Yeah.
Actually, with my sister, when I was teaching her this at home, I used Play-Doh. So small balls of dough represented the ones, and then I take 10 of them together and make a big ball, and that way 10.
Yeah, brilliant.
She got that
Excellent.
really
Yeah, that's
maths
great.
teaching.
Yeah. Well, you got the maths challenge, wouldn't you? No, you worked at there, you know. I thought you were. So that's very good. Well done.
Perhaps you should be.
Because obviously, you know, with the Cuisinaire rods and things like that, you have like these ones. You can see these ones as well. I'm sure you have 1 or 2. You always have these. They're not marked on there, so it doesn't matter if they're not actually marked 10, as long as it represents that. Just like you're saying, that one mass. As long as the child is understanding that. Excellent. So yeah, and also just the graphic organiser, as the lady over there mentioned. I mean, this is something to go back to word problems as well. You know, a graphic organiser is something that's like a plan for them that they can put things onto.
We're going to have to rethink this somehow sometimes, because I didn't realise that picture was there. With the graphic organiser and the boards there. So.
But anyway, I'll just show you very quickly with, we haven't got an awful lot of time left, so I'll just show you very quickly with this little girl. So then basically I went back and we did what the lady was just mentioned over there, was we put it into a graphic organising form and we put the tens and we put the units. Then I gave her the number.
And I'm sure, like you said earlier on, there are lots of software coming up these days on iPads and all sorts of things that would enable you to do this still kinesthetically, but not concretely with real objects.
So, basically she's shown a representation. I mean, I know a lot of you all know this, but I think the main thing I'm saying is just remember to go back. You need to go back and do this, and then practice that for a while until she seems to be totally clear on what that practical thing is representing, and then you can maybe go to her drawing it, and then you go to writing the abstract numbers for it.
Another example.
And then I moved her on a bit because she was beginning to get quite comfortable with tens and units, so we moved on to 100 tens and units, and she was fine. But I think I'm going to move on because
Okay.
and finally, multi-step arithmetic problems. Not necessarily word problems, just ones where they're having to do a few different things. In fact, a multi-step problem for a child who's been just counting to 10 would be the next step on from that, where they're maybe putting two single digits together, or it might be where they've been doing one-to-one correspondence and then they're having to say what the ordinal number is, rather than counting to 5, they just know that is 5. They look at it and know that represents 5. So I'll just have a quick look. There was a little lady doing a multi-step problem here, which was a bit of an issue.
We already see what kind of issues might arise here.
This also, I'll say in a minute, have a look and see what you think you would do to accommodate the problem she's having. But it's also, we need to do something else here because of the problem she's having. Yeah, so she started doing that, and I think she just...
Is that right?
No, she started doing it, and then she started using some sort of strategy, and then I think she just thought, I'll just put this. But anyway, she was having a difficulty with that one. She does try and explain it to me, but she's not got it. I always ask them to explain to me how they got there as well, and she gave me a lovely explanation, but it wasn't. It wasn't going to get her to the answer anyway.
But she estimated.
Pardon?
She did the estimation.
Well, let's say she did. That sounds better. Let's say she did that.
So, what do you think you would do? I mean, what do you think what you would do as accommodation for a child like that who was doing that? I'll just very quickly say also, what became very apparent there was that what was she having a problem with that we needed to go back and look at place value. Yeah, it wasn't just about the calculation either. I mean, I put that as a step problem because that it is a step problem, and she would have needed to get onto crossing tens over and that kind of business. But what became also very apparent to me, just as an assessment tool, was that she needed to go back. So what we did then was we had a look at using blocks to solve that problem, but we're going back and looking at place value with her because she's just not clear on that. And that's where I needed to step back. I'm not going to move on, I'm not going to carry on doing that. But I'll just show you quickly what we tried to do then was just see how she got on with just a visual organiser, with just a graphic organiser. If she put it in columns on that kind of format, was she going to be able to manage it then? That's what I wanted to see. Was it just the layout that had confused her? She's also hasn't got single digit addition. She's not using strategies to add 8 and 3, like round it to a 10, add a 3, or she's still using a finger. So you've got to go along with that.
Yeah, and as we said earlier, this is where you look at your policy, your developmental continuum, and you move back to find where she's comfortable, and then we take her one small step at a time.
So she's basically, I've taken her back to place value, basically, and that's what we're looking at, and also strategies for solving single digit numbers. Okay, now really, basically, that's the end. You know, we have a half-hour session. I'm aware that SEN across the school, primary school, is huge. There's lots of things that you can be doing, but I'm hoping that's just helped you think a little bit about how you can just use what you have in school, you know, moving back steps along the continuum, having your colleagues help you who are working earlier down the years, and using all those different accommodations that involve multisensory learning, which we've got on those handouts. We've got some references here as well, because given a short time, but you could go away and spend your time doing this if you'd like.
Particularly, I think with that what works for children with mathematical difficulties is not related to this at all, but it's a great little handbook. Give you some ideas. The implementing and accommodations and modifications effectively, they're brilliant. Both of those ones, that one and the learner accommodations and structure modifications, they're really good. They give you lots of ideas for different modifications for different types of learning difficulty. Again, generally associated with those 4 areas that we talked about earlier on: number facts, multi-step problems, word problems, and place value. They seem to be, in all our readings and the literature we've looked at and our experience, they seem to be the most common difficulties that children have with mathematics.
I'm just finally, I'd just like to say, you know, I had half an hour today to talk to you, and I really did have to quite limit it down. But if anybody is interested to come and talk to me more or come and visit our school, that they're very welcome to do so. So, and I can explain a little bit more. I can even show you how a lot of these things work. So I'll put my email address in here, and just contact me, and we can probably will be after Christmas, after holiday, I can imagine. But if you are interested, just contact me, and I'll be very happy to show you what we do and then talk a little bit more. But any questions? I'll just write myself and show you.
Okay.
In a normal class with the normal strength of students, how to cater to this?
Is there a normal class with the normal strength of students? But you're talking about according to developmental norms, I'm taking that.
As how to cater to the SEN students in the class?
Well, Horizon is a good example of that. They have a wave 1 intervention where the teacher tries to differentiate the work according to the ability of the child, referring back to the developmental norms. They also have teaching assistants in the class. You also having people in the class, having people that know what they're doing or can be trained to support in the classroom is a big thing, because you know very often there's one person in the classroom with a lot of children. I myself once had a class of 45, so I know how difficult it can be to manage. But the wave 1 and wave 2 and wave 3 interventions that are in operation at Horizon, with the kind of support that they have both from a learning enhancement coordinator, trained teaching assistants, and parents help to improve the teacher really.
I mean, a lot of these things
So
can be
basically,
differentiated.
support staff should.
Pardon?
No, basically support staff should be there with the.
Well, trained TAs are used quite a lot to support with this on the class basis. Yeah, a teacher will plan, and then TAs will support children. TAs will support children who are low ability in a group who might need these sort of accommodations, or the teacher will work with them and the TA will work elsewhere. But we don't have TAs 1 per class. We still manage to do that. You know what I mean? It's enough to be able to do that. Yeah.
Girl who has done her assessment and now in a school. We realized that our goal is in then so we did our whole knowing